On the night of May 1st, 2011, US forces flew into Pakistan and killed Osama bin Laden. Its leaders knew nothing about it until hours later. They ordered a report to find out what happened. But 18 months later, they suppressed its findings. Al Jazeera has released a copy of that document. And now we reveal the details of Pakistan's bin Laden dossier.
This is the report the Pakistani government never wanted you to see. A 300-page study of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, kept secret by the Pakistani government. We have verified it as genuine. We have made its findings public. The Pakistani government's reaction has been to set up an investigation into who made the leak. But as for its content, no comment. Over the next half hour, Al Jazeera brings you detailed analysis of Pakistan's bin Laden dossier. The report reveals previously unknown details about Osama bin Laden, how the al-Qaeda leader moved around at first in the northwestern provinces in South Waziristan, in places like Peshawar and Bajar in Swat. It was there in 2003, a clean-shaven Osama bin Laden was in the back of a car stopped for speeding, but escaped unrecognized. He settled in Haripur for 2 years before moving to that infamous compound in Abbottabad. That was in 2005. There he lived as a recluse, even wearing a cowboy hat to avoid detection from above. But in early May of 2011, Osama bin Laden's luck ran out. With more details on his life and the raid that ended it, here's Clayton Swisher.
This was where Osama bin Laden lived for 6 years, a home registered under a fake ID. The Pakistani report indicates that no one knew he was there, at least not officially. But it was not for a lack of clues. This is what the investigation found out. The al-Qaeda leader hired 2 brothers to guard him and paid each 9,000 rupees a month. That's about $90 to the so-called Kuwaiti brothers, Ibrahim and Abrar, for guarding the world's most wanted. In 2005, just 2 months after bin Laden moved in, a massive earthquake struck. A local policeman tells the commission the compound walls collapsed. Bin Laden was exposed, but he still was not found. He lived with his 2 youngest wives for years. His eldest wife was escorted to Abbottabad just 3 months before the American raid. Before that, the document confirms Khairiyah stayed in the Iranian capital Tehran for nearly 8 years, 2002 to 2010. The report also contains evidence of previously unknown preparations made for the raid by the CIA. Nearby poplar trees were cut down. The Army's top lawyer suspects it was to facilitate the approach of the U.S. helicopters. A man called Saeed Iqbal went on a nearby roof and took photographs. Iqbal was a former ISI officer with his own security firm. Pakistan's spy chief tells the commission his profile matched that of a CIA recruit. And since the raid, Iqbal tried to sell his property, and the report notes that he fled the country. The night of the raid takes on a new narrative, as told by Pakistani witnesses and bin Laden's wives. First, 4 to 5 vehicles are seen leaving the U.S. Embassy towards Abbottabad. The Army suggests they may have been CIA agents to assist the helicopters. U.S. choppers take off from Jalalabad Air Base in Afghanistan after 2,300 hours. They fly low and fast over the border, entering Pakistani airspace around 20 minutes later. Pakistani radars do not detect them. The report says they are at rest, or as the Air Force prefers, peacetime deployment. At about 30 minutes after midnight, 2 Black Hawks arrive at the compound. The sound of the helicopter wakes bin Laden and his youngest wife, Amal. She tells investigators bin Laden said the American helicopters had arrived. She went to turn on the light, but the sheikh says no. It's no use anyways. The electricity cuts out across the area. At the same time, one of the American choppers crashes nearby. Locals hear it. Amal sees an American soldier on the landing. She rushes him. But he screamed, "No, no," and shot her in the knee. In the report, the eldest wife says one of the soldiers seemed as frightened as her. He looked as if he'd seen a witch. At 1:06 a.m., U.S. forces blow up the downed helicopter and leave. The document details how the Air Force only learns of the raid on television. At 2:07 a.m., the Army chief orders jets to shoot down the intruding helicopters. It takes them up to 16 minutes to reach the area. And it's too late anyway. The Americans have already gone, taking bin Laden's body with them.
Clayton Swisher there with that report about what the report says about the raid. But, you know, it goes much deeper than that. And we've got Ijaz Haider with us here to help us wade through it all. He's a Pakistani journalist who focuses on strategic, political and defence issues. And it's a pleasure to have you with us, Ijaz.
Thank you for having me here.
Tell me about your initial reaction to this very report.
It's a great report. It's candid and it makes a very serious attempt to broadly look at the issues of governance implosion, as they say, civil-military relations, how that has impacted and became a reason for why the May 2nd raid happened and why Osama bin Laden actually lived in Pakistan undetected.
Surprisingly candid, would you say, given the way that the Pakistanis were happy to turn the mirror on themselves as well?
Absolutely. I won't say surprisingly candid, but I do find, what I find interesting is that they've actually interviewed the concerned people and given their observations. And those observations are very candid. And I think it's excellent that this report has come out.
Well, let's look at some of the specifics, Ijaz, because this report also speaks about how the military and the spy agency and the ISI, of course that is, so overpowered the civilian government. Well, have a look at what it says. It says of the defence minister that he seemed to recognise that as a civilian he had no authority to meddle in defence and security affairs. The Minister of Defence couldn't meddle in defence affairs. Explain that one to me.
Well, this gentleman recognized that he doesn't have an authority to meddle in these affairs, but he did not seem to recognize that the honest course for him would have been on that basis to resign, which he did not, because he liked the perks. And yes, it is because of the civil-military divide and imbalance that the defense minister is someone who does not really is concerned with defense affairs. He simply signs the files. And it's the defense secretary who deals with these issues. But the issue really is, was he able to exercise control? Because he also heads the Defense Council. And if you look at the Commission's observations, they say that he could have convened the meetings of the Defense Council, but he chose not to. So, yes, there is the problem of civil-military imbalance, but there's also the problem of abdication of authority by the man who was in charge of the Ministry of Defense.
Ijaz, we're going to come back to you later. I want one quick thought from you, though, before we move on, about what's not in this report, and that is page 197.
Yes.
What do you think's missing?
I don't know, it's conjectural. But if you look at the Commission's observations, you don't find anything that possibly could have been a reference to what is missing. It could, you know, one of the theories is that it's probably about the demands that the US made, but those demands are known. General Musharraf even talked about those demands in his book. The other theory about what the Americans say about they having told Islamabad that they would have, if they find bin Laden, they will come in unilaterally if need be.
Right.
So, but again, as I said, it's conjectural. And it could possibly be simply because this page just slipped out of the report.
It could, of course, be that.
Yeah.
Ijaz, we will come back to you later on. Stay with me. I want to look at some other content first of all, because, of course, we've talked about the government, which has been quiet on the release of this report. They have opened an investigation to find the source of the leak, but nothing about what's actually in it. Our correspondent Imran Khan attended the Pakistan Foreign Office's weekly briefing. He tried to ask them about it. Have a look.
It's Imran Khan from Jazeera English. I just wanted to ask this question to Mr. Iqbal. Has there been any reaction from your government on the leaked Abbottabad Commission report?
As you know, the government is carrying out an inquiry and investigating the matter. So we just have to wait for the report to come.
Get some political reaction. Joining us from Pakistan is Qamar Zaman Khaira. He is a former information minister in Asif Ali Zardari's government and a spokesman for the Pakistan People's Party. We thank you very much for your time, sir. Let me read to you from the report. The Commission says, I'm quoting here, the Pakistan government's response before, during and after the raid appears in large part to be a story of complacency, ignorance, negligence, incompetence, irresponsibility and possibly worse. Can you give me your reaction to that sort of language, that sort of description?
As far as the language of the report is concerned, or the special part of that which you have read, I am not aware of that, and I will comment on this later on. But as far as the report is concerned, first my response will be that after this incident of Abbottabad and Osama bin Laden's killing, there are many interviews, books, there are many rather films, documentaries which have given all the details of this whole operation over there in Abbottabad. And there is nothing new in this report which has revealed, as far as the operation is concerned, the Abbottabad operation is concerned, all the details are there as far as the hat issue is concerned, or personal family life of Osama bin Laden, how the family was living over there. They are irrelevant stories over there as far as the incident is concerned.
But it
yes,
is, excuse me interrupting you, it is an official report that was suppressed. That says something in itself.
Nothing wrong. I'm saying that this report is not revealing anything new. All these incidents, all these facts, rather I think General John Abizad's report, which was published in the name of Letters from Abbottabad, which was published in some paper, and that has given all the detail, micro detail of that, and this report is just seconding it. I think, as far as I am concerned, there is nothing new except all those the irrelevant issues when one agency is saying something and alleging the other agency and shifting the responsibility. But that is basically the Pakistani establishment to look into it. But as far as the international community is concerned, is there, I think this report is not revealing something very substantial for the international community to be concerned. Yes, Osama bin Laden was there. Yes, he was killed. Why Pakistani government's response was slow, and why they were not prompt, they did not prompted it.
Well, this is the key, isn't it?
Concerned, or my knowledge is concerned.
It is very critical of the Pakistani government, and in fact, soon after the raid, the Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying it recognized the death of Osama bin Laden was a milestone in the fight against terrorism. But the Commission said that statement was truly shameful. It twisted and turned and went through all the convolutions of an acrobat to avoid explicitly condemning the US action. The statement dripped with confusion, fear, hypocrisy, deceit and insincerity. Explain to me all these things.
Just look the other side. If the Pakistani forces response, suppose they detected the helicopters and they responded it, and there was a clash in the, by Pakistani Air Force, and one or two helicopters were drowned, then what happened? Then what would have happened? What would have been the circumstances? But as far as Pakistan is concerned, my first response is that the technology, there are 2-3 things which I will explain in very short time. That the technology which was used by the Americans, that is stealth technology, and Pakistan does not have those radars with Pakistani Army or Air Force which can detect the stealth technology. And those were those helicopters which took part in the operation. They were low-flying helicopters, and they were well rehearsed as well, and using that technology which Pakistan doesn't occupy, and Pakistan doesn't have the technology, and forces are not using that, which can detect stealth technology. So what to say about that? The second thing is, the western borders of Pakistan were always safe. As far as now, this time is concerned, yes, our forces and government, we believe that from western side, means Afghanistan side, there will be no aerial attack on Pakistan. Of course, on ground attack, the Taliban are coming from that side, but no aerial attack, because our friend of war and the ISAF forces, they are there, and they will not make anything else. And there was a trust. And if some friend,
I'm sorry, we are going to have to leave it there. We've got limited time in this broadcast, but I thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us today. Now, although it criticises all arms of the Pakistani state, the Commission saves some of its toughest words for the United States. The authors say the raid was an act of war and an example of American arrogance. From Washington, D.C., here's Josh Bernstein.
The report focuses on the fact that the U.S. raid not only killed bin Laden, but also 3 Pakistani citizens while violating the nation's airspace. In Islamabad, leaders only learned about it on television. Not long after, there were protests across the country. U.S. Admiral Mike Mullen, the highest-ranking military officer in the United States, only called Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff at 5 a.m. the next morning, 6 hours after the raid began. The raid was the greatest humiliation visited upon the country since its breakup in 1971. Ever since the war in Afghanistan in 2001, Pakistan was always an unenthusiastic ally in what the U.S. called its war on terror.
President Musharraf was enthusiastic, I think, primarily because he saw a way to get his country out of pariah status in the 10-year divorce it had with the United States. There were others, particularly ISI, which for 10 years had fostered a different policy.
The U.S. became frustrated and planned to hunt for bin Laden alone, but for that, it needed access. According to the report, the U.S. turned to the Pakistani ambassador to the U.S., Hussein Haqqani. The report accuses Haqqani of providing hundreds of visas, which ultimately facilitated the unilateral manhunt for Osama bin Laden. That is something he strongly denies.
During the meeting with the Commission, I very clearly pointed out to them that there was no unauthorized visa issued. And very frankly, I don't think the Navy SEALs came into Pakistan with visas issued by the Embassy of Pakistan in the United States.
In the years after 2005, the relationship soured even further, with the U.S. accusing Pakistan of tipping off jihadists ahead of American raids. The report acknowledges a shortage of mutual appreciation, a lack of regard and trust in this contingent, transactional, and often resentful relationship.
Yeah, I think there's every reason not to have trust. From their point of view, for historical reasons, from our point of view, as we find it very difficult to understand how they can consort with the Talibs who are killing Americans.
By 2011, the U.S. was regularly conducting drone operations within Pakistan. The report says the buildup of U.S. aggressiveness and hostility were noted, but their policy implications were not dealt with seriously. And in the run-up to the raid itself, explicit threats were communicated by Barack Obama, but all of them were either ignored or discounted. This was a massive and irresponsible lack of due diligence. The report paints a picture of Pakistan as manipulated and undermined by the U.S. Pakistan's spy chief says the nation had become too weak and dependent to defend itself against U.S. policies. And none of the other political, security, and intelligence agencies had the knowledge, the will, or the authority to combat the spread of the CIA's tentacles all over the country. Today, the U.S. drones still fly over Pakistan. Relations are at a low, but still, a key question of the report remains unanswered. What is Pakistan's policy when it's threatened by a superpower like the U.S.?
Well, let's look more at the US side of this report. Cameron Munter was the US ambassador to Pakistan at the time of the raid. I spoke to him earlier and put this quote from the report to him. The Foreign Secretary said that after 9/11, there were no written agreements. Everything was done orally and decisions were taken that no one owned up to. I asked the ambassador if that was the case.
Well, as you know, there are certain relationships that states have when there are formal military agreements. The Americans have, for example, with our friends in Germany, with our friends in Japan, with our friends in Afghanistan through NATO. We have stationing of forces agreements. Such an agreement, such a formal military agreement does not exist between Pakistan and America. So during the time that I was there, many arrangements were made for assistance, for Americans to work with Pakistanis to try to fight against the common enemy, and many of these things were put down on paper. I think what the report is trying to say is that for many people in the public, these reports were not clear. And I think this is more of an internal Pakistani issue than it is a question between our two countries.
Okay. One of the curious things that come out after the raid was the way that the CIA had co-opted a group like Save the Children into its intelligence gathering system. Again, quoting from the report, it says the director of the CIA personally requested the Director General of the ISI to not expose Save the Children's role in its activities in Pakistan. I mean, how do you feel about that situation? Surely puts everyone at risk, the health workers, everyone up from there.
You know, whatever happened with Dr. Afridi, I would categorically reject the idea that the USAID or other international assistance programs had anything to do with intelligence operations. I think that's simply false. And I think that the idea that people would mention this or even accuse these groups like Save the Children or like USAID of being involved in intelligence operations is simply not wrong, and it's irresponsible. These people are in Pakistan as partners. They're there to help Pakistanis, and I think it's irresponsible to claim that they had something to do, anything to do with the intelligence operations.
The report said that explicit threats were communicated by President Obama about the raid. Did you at any time warn Pakistan or inform them directly, indirectly, that this was coming? Did you even know it was coming?
We did not, no.
We or
and
you?
I'll make no other comments about that. Yes, I was aware of the raid, but there are no further comments about that.
Okay, then. The report suggests, and they've put a name here as well, Lieutenant Colonel Syed Iqbal, who was a retired Pakistan ISI officer, taking photographs of the bin Laden compound. Now, in your position, were you aware of any situation where Pakistani soldiers, retired or otherwise, were recruited effectively to spy and to effectively set all of this up?
I have nothing for you on that.
One final thought for you, and that is on the American drone attacks. The DG of the ISI said there were no written agreements. There was a political understanding. Can you tell us about that political understanding, you know, as far as the drones go?
Yes, I'm afraid that because of the classified nature of the drone program, that's not appropriate for me to comment on at this time.
Okay, the situation we have is an American raid on Pakistani soil. If that situation was reversed, I mean, explain to me how the United States would react.
In this particular case, there was disappointment on the Pakistani side, and yet, when I spoke with leaders, both civilian and military, the night of the raid, the first words out of their mouths, both civilian and military leaders, was congratulations. Why? Because they understood, just as we understood, that this was someone who the world needed to deal with. And so, tough as that was, and tough as the aftermath was, we all feel that this is someone who we all had to go after. And this overwhelming truth, I think, was clear both to the Pakistani leadership and to the people of Pakistan, as well as to the Americans.
Cameron Munter, US Ambassador to Pakistan at the time of the bin Laden raid, we thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Ijaz Haider still with us here in the studio, a Pakistani journalist who focuses on defence issues. Ijaz, page 262 of the report. It says of the US and Pakistan, it is a relationship about which the government of Pakistan have seldom been honest with their own people. This report's been pretty honest about it, hasn't it? Do you think it's given the clear picture?
Absolutely. This is the crux of the matter. Musharraf, a dictator, made certain agreements. No one actually knew about those agreements. And those agreements, the nature of those agreements are only now coming out. And the People's Party government actually followed more or less the same policy, despite being a democratic government. And this is where one has to actually look at it. I mean, from page 213 to 218, they talk about the visa issues, because the DGI spoke about the American spy network spreading inside Pakistan, and it's actually a fact. There were lots of stories about it in the domestic press also. So these people were, on the one hand, focused on the TTP threat against the security forces and also on this threat that was developing. And therefore, their threat orientation was very different from actually focusing on finding Osama bin Laden. And so, and I'm not trying to cut slack to the ISI here, but the fact is that there is a kernel of truth there in terms of why they could not actually focus on the issue of bin Laden.
Quick thought again about the fact that this could possibly all happen again. You think about a guy like Ayman al-Zawahiri. If he's still in Pakistan, what's to stop any of this all happening again? Just a quick thought.
Well, I hope they're focused on trying to find him, but I must say that another raid of this kind by the United States is not something that the people of Pakistan, and I focus not the government of Pakistan, but the people of Pakistan are likely to tolerate.
Ijaz Haider, it's been a pleasure having you with us here. Thank you so much for your time. As you've seen, this 300-page report is packed with details about Osama bin Laden and Pakistan. If you want to see it in full, we've got our copy here, obviously. But all the video reports, all the articles, it is all at aljazeera.com/bin Laden files. That is where you can see all of that. It's all there, except that missing page, of course, as we said, page 197. We're still looking for it ourselves. I'm Kamal Santamaria. Thanks so much for joining us for this Al Jazeera Investigates special.